We're told that history is written by the victors, but what if it's written by those who need us to forget? What if the most fundamental truths about our world, about where we came from and who populated our cities, have been deliberately hidden behind a wall of convenient lies and sanitized narratives? Today, we're going to pull back that curtain and examine one of the most disturbing phenomena of the 19th century, a phenomenon that might reveal the true nature of how our modern world was actually populated. Look at any old photograph from the late 1800s of a major city. Paris, London, New York, St. Petersburg. What do you see? Magnificent architecture, wide boulevards, perfectly engineered infrastructure. But look closer. Where are the people? These metropolises, capable of housing hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, appear almost completely deserted. The streets are empty. The chimneys, though numerous, emit no smoke. There's no bustle of commerce, no signs of daily life, no laundry hanging from windows, no vendors hawking their wares. Just silence, a haunting, all-encompassing emptiness. The standard explanation is simple and convenient. Early cameras required long exposure times, so moving people simply didn't register on the photographic plates. But this explanation crumbles the moment you examine other photographs from the exact same period, showing crowded streets, horses pulling carriages, people going about their business. By the 1880s, the technology absolutely existed to capture motion. The Lumiere brothers were already filming people walking down busy streets. So, why are these grand cities so utterly devoid of life? And it's not just the absence of people that troubles the mind. It's the absence of everything that makes a city alive. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of chimneys on these rooftops. Yet not a single plume of smoke rises into the air. In an era where every home was heated by fire, where every meal was cooked over burning coal or wood, this silence of the chimneys speaks volumes. These weren't just quiet cities. These were cold cities, dead cities. The streets that should have been arteries of trade show no carts, no stalls, no goods being transported. Public squares designed for gatherings stand empty and sterile. Parks meant for leisure contain only thin, newly planted saplings, trees that couldn't be more than a few years old, standing in stark contrast to architecture that appears centuries ancient. It's as if someone built these magnificent stone structures in the middle of a barren landscape, and only then, as an afterthought, began planting vegetation. If you compare these locations to how they look today, you'll see towering old-growth trees, forests that took 150 years to mature. Which means when those photographs were taken, all of this was indeed brand new. But why? What happened to the nature that must have existed before? What happened to the people who should have been there? The buildings themselves tell a strange story. Many of them have windows and doors that descend directly into the ground, entire first floors buried beneath what's now street level. We see grand entrances positioned unnaturally high, with ornate basement windows below that were clearly never designed to be underground. Official explanations talk about cultural layers, about centuries of accumulated debris gradually raising the street level. But cultural layers form slowly, adding mere centimeters per century. What we're seeing is entire floors, sometimes 2 or 3 meters of burial, occurring in a remarkably short time span across cities all over the world. Look at the photographs from the actual 19th century excavation efforts. The people in these images aren't building, they're digging out structures that were already there. The streets are torn up, revealing massive pits filled with clay and mud. Steam shovels and entire railway systems were brought in to remove this soil. In Seattle, they called them glacial hills. In Kansas City, buildings were buried up to 23 feet deep under compacted earth. These weren't construction sites. These were archaeological recoveries on a massive industrial scale. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. Where did all that excavated earth go? In cities like Seattle, powerful water cannons were used to wash away these so-called glacial hills, the same technique gold miners used in Alaska to thaw and remove permafrost. They loaded millions of cubic yards of soil onto barges and dumped it into the sea, an operation of staggering scope and complexity. But why? What were they really dealing with? The evidence points to something far more catastrophic than official history admits, something that buried entire civilizations under layers of mud and sediment, something that left magnificent structures standing but empty, their lower floors swallowed by earth, their populations vanished. Which brings us to the most crucial question. If the cities were empty, who filled them? Where did the new inhabitants come from? This is where the second great mystery of the 19th century emerges, one that intertwines with the first in ways that are almost too disturbing to contemplate. It's the mystery of the orphans, an unprecedented worldwide explosion of children without parents, without families, without any documented origin. The 19th century saw the establishment of orphanages on a scale never before witnessed in human history. In Great Britain alone, over 400 such institutions were founded. In Italy, by 1860, the orphanages of Milan and Naples had taken in 374,000 infants. Moscow was receiving up to 18,000 abandoned babies per year by the 1880s. These weren't isolated tragedies. This was a global phenomenon, a demographic tsunami of parentless children that official history struggles to explain with simple tales of poverty and social stigma. The numbers are simply too vast, the infrastructure too organized, the distribution too systematic. This wasn't chaos. This was coordination on a planetary scale. And then there were the orphan trains. From 1854 to 1929, hundreds of thousands of children from overcrowded East Coast orphanages were loaded onto trains and shipped west. They were displayed at stations like livestock, where farmers and settlers could choose which ones to take. Officially, this was charity, a chance for these children to find new families and new lives. But the reality was far more pragmatic. These were human resources being distributed to populate empty territories. This wasn't just an American phenomenon. Similar programs operated worldwide. Children were shipped from Europe to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Wherever there were territories that needed settlers, orphans were sent, children with no memory of their origins, no family connections, no ties to any past. The perfect blank slates for building a new population. But the most unsettling aspect of this orphan mysteries isn't the sheer numbers. It's where they came from, or rather, where history claims they came from. We're told these were the children of unwed mothers, born into shame and given up to escape social stigma. But does this explanation hold up when we're talking about millions of children appearing simultaneously across the entire world? When orphanages in Italy alone had processed nearly 400,000 infants by the mid-19th century, when the infrastructure to collect, house, transport, and redistribute these children operated with the efficiency of a military campaign. Enter one of the strangest artifacts of this era, the postcards. Thousands upon thousands of postcards produced across Europe and America, all depicting babies in the most bizarre and surreal scenarios. Babies growing from cabbage patches, babies hatching from giant eggs, babies sprouting from mushrooms like some kind of crop, babies being delivered by storks wearing postman caps, transported by trains and airships as if they were cargo. At first glance, these seem like quaint vintage humor, peculiar art from a bygone era. But look closer at the captions. Many are written in French, but they appear across multiple countries, from France to Germany to the United States. And the words they use are not metaphorical, they're commercial. On one card, a sign reads, "Modern Baby Bazaar, free entry. We fear no competition. Everything is for sale. We do not accept returns." On another, babies sit in baskets, each with a caption describing their qualities. "I will be good. I won't wet the bed. I am cheerful. I will love you." Product descriptions aimed at potential buyers. Resume cards for infants. The French phrase à vendre appears again and again. It doesn't mean for adoption. It means for sale. This wasn't symbolic. This was advertising. And perhaps most tellingly, some cards feature a single word that ties everything together. Repopulation. Not adoption, not charity. Repopulation. The deliberate, systematic settling of territories with a new population. With children who had no past, no memory, no family to tell them what came before. The fairy tales we grew up with suddenly take on a darker meaning. You were found in a cabbage patch. The stork brought you. These weren't just innocent lies told to curious children. They were cultural echoes of a real system, a global infrastructure for producing and distributing human beings. And then there's Martin Cooney and his infant incubators. At world's fairs and amusement parks across America, from Coney Island to the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, Cooney set up exhibits where premature babies lay in glass incubators while crowds paid admission to gawk at them. Next to carnival rides and cotton candy vendors, living human infants were displayed like zoo animals. The official story paints Cooney as a hero, a doctor who saved lives by raising money for expensive equipment through these displays. He supposedly saved 80,000 babies over his career. But the questions this raises are staggering. Where did 80,000 premature infants come from? Where were their parents? Why were people, in an era when childbirth was commonplace, willing to pay money to see babies in incubators as if it were some kind of marvel they had never witnessed before? What's particularly chilling is that these infant exhibitions often appeared at the same fairs that hosted eugenics displays. The pseudoscience of selective breeding, of improving the human race through controlled reproduction, sat comfortably alongside incubators full of vulnerable children. Was this coincidence? Or was it a preview of something far more systematic? All the pieces begin to fit together when you step back and look at the full picture. Empty cities that were excavated, not built. Architecture that shows engineering capabilities far beyond what the official timeline suggests should have existed. Millions of children appearing with no documented origins. A global system for collecting, transporting, and distributing these children to populate vacant territories. Postcards openly advertising their sale. Public displays normalizing the idea of babies as commodities that could be viewed, evaluated, selected. What if I told you that in the wake of some catastrophic event, a global catastrophe that buried cities and decimated populations, those who survived or took control faced a simple but monumental problem? They had inherited an entire world's worth of infrastructure, magnificent cities with advanced engineering, but almost no people to inhabit them. You can't populate a planet with adults who remember what came before, who know the truth about the previous civilization, who might ask dangerous questions. But children? Children are malleable. Children have no memory. Children can be told any story you want, raised to believe any version of history you provide. So, a system was created, perhaps through orphanages that collected every child who could be found, perhaps through more disturbing means that we can only glimpse in those unsettling postcards showing babies cultivated like crops. The infrastructure was massive and coordinated. The distribution was global and efficient. The result was a complete repopulation of the world, with a generation that had no connection to what came before. The orphan trains weren't charity, they were colonization. The foundling homes weren't rescue missions, they were reservoirs of human resources. The incubator exhibits weren't medical marvels, they were conditioning, normalizing the idea that children could be produced, displayed, and distributed like any other commodity. And the fairy tales, the storks and the cabbage patches, they were the cover story, the sanitized version of a truth so disturbing that it had to be transformed into children's stories so that future generations would never question where all those orphans really came from. Look at what we know happened. Cities all across the world were found buried and empty. A global network of orphanages appeared simultaneously to handle an unprecedented flood of children. Those children were systematically distributed to populate territories. Postcards openly advertised this process using symbolic imagery that we're supposed to believe was just whimsy. Technologies for mass incubation of infants were publicly displayed at entertainment venues. The only thing that makes all of these disconnected facts connect into a coherent narrative is this. Our current civilization is the result of a great reset. Sometime in the recent past, far more recent than we're told, a catastrophic event occurred. It buried the cities of a previous, more advanced civilization. It decimated the global population, and what followed was not a natural recovery, but a deliberate, coordinated repopulation program using children who could be raised with no memory of what came before. We are the descendants of that reset generation. We live in cities we didn't build. We walk on streets that were excavated, not constructed. We've been given a history that starts conveniently after the catastrophe, a history that attributes all the magnificent architecture and engineering to our primitive ancestors with their hammers and chisels. But the evidence is everywhere once you know how to look. The buried floors of buildings that were clearly meant to be above ground, the young trees surrounding ancient architecture, the empty cities in photographs, the millions of orphans, the systematic distribution, the commercial postcards, the incubator exhibits. Every piece points to the same conclusion. Sometime around the 18th or early 19th century, the world was reset, and we've been living in the aftermath ever since, fed a carefully constructed narrative designed to make us forget what really happened and who we really are. The implications are staggering. If they lied about something this fundamental, this recent, what else have they lied about? What other truths have been buried not just beneath meters of mud, but beneath layers of false history? You can choose to dismiss this. You can retreat into the comfortable narrative you were taught in school. Or you can start seeing the world with new eyes. Start noticing the buried windows. Start questioning why there were so many orphans. Start asking why the official explanations never quite add up. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The truth is written into the very architecture around you, preserved in forgotten postcards, documented in photographs they never meant you to analyze too closely. We weren't meant to ask these questions, but here we are, asking them anyway. And the answer they reveal is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means everything we thought we knew about our origins is a lie. Liberating because it means we're finally beginning to remember what was taken from us. The truth about who built this world, the truth about where we really came from, the truth about the Great Reset that shaped our modern civilization. The investigation has only just begun.